Knowing how to use the mass media to disseminate information to the public is one of the most important public relations skills. In this presentation, you will learn about mass media tactics used by PR professionals. And so one thing I want to say up front is that we are not talking about social media here. We have another chapter where we discuss social media, as well as another chapter that talks about events. And so if we think about the 4 steps of public relations campaigns that we've already talked about: research, planning, communication, and evaluation or measurement, tactics come in on the communication step. And so this is how we actually execute our campaign. This is what we are doing in our public relations campaign. So again, we're not doing the research, we're not planning the campaign, we're actually doing the campaign. And then the final step is to evaluate the campaign. So we are going to review the many tactics available to PR professionals to generate publicity using mass media. And so first we will discuss news releases and photos and infographics. We will also discuss how to pitch the media. We will then review some various materials that are sent to media outlets, such as media advisories, fact sheets, and media kits. Next, we will go over interactions with media outlets, including interviews and news conferences, as well as, I skipped media previews and tours. We will also talk about the vast reach of television and radio and how you can use news releases and public service announcements on television and radio. And then finally, we will talk about product placement in television and film. So PR reaches people by disseminating information through the mass media as well as through other ways, but we're talking specifically here about the mass media. Now you might be wondering about digital media. It's not mutually exclusive for these following reasons. Most mass media outlets do have a digital presence, so whatever they are disseminating through, say, a newspaper or a television news program, they're also posting on their websites. There's also mobile apps in addition to, say, a website. The mass media does have unique characteristics to distinguish it from social media, and it is still considered more trustworthy than owned media or social media. So when I say owned media, that's if you had your own website and you're putting out information there. The idea that the journalists would be vetting the information is what leads us to believe that it's more trustworthy. Mentions can create public awareness and visibility for an organization, its services, or its brand. So, the more publicity we can get for our products or our company, the better. So I just talked about public trust in information sources and that traditional media tends to be higher than other forms of media. This is a stat from 2021 from the Edelman Trust Barometer survey that found that 56% of people trusted traditional media, 35% social media, and 41% owned media. Again, that's your own brand's website and other products that you put out there yourself. So let me make a few more points about why the mass media are so influential. First of all, they command vast audiences. There are many people who, yes, are still watching television news or reading newspapers. This allows public relations practitioners to disseminate information in a cost-effective way. So, it's really just our time, our writing, our pitching to reporters. We're not having to pay to have our story placed in the news medium for the most part. Information and ideas are more influential when they're communicated by members of the mass media. Again, those journalists are vetting the stories and checking the information out themselves. There is an idea that reporters and editors serve as independent filters, which is basically what I was just saying. Earned media is when you get your story in the news. So there's a front page story on the New York Times about your company. That's earned media. It is 80% more effective in convincing consumers to buy a product or service than other forms, say like advertising. Mass media, as we learned, sets the agenda for public discussion, and additionally, it might get cited on blogs or social media, so they might pick up the story in other places. So there are a lot of opportunities for public relations practitioners to use the mass media. As I just mentioned, it is cost effective. It can be used with any other communication channel. So maybe you're doing social media and mass media. Publicity can also be earned with interviews. So in addition to, oh, here's a story idea for you, you could pitch to reporters an interview with your CEO, for example. There are some public relations opportunities that are unique to different media. We're going to talk about those. And then PR professionals have their pick of media outlets, the show hosts and columnists. So you can figure out which is the right vehicle for your story. The news releases, often called press releases, are the most common tactic used by public relations professionals to disseminate information to mass media outlets. And a study found that 77% of journalists use press releases and 80% use PR sources of some sort. So these numbers signify the broad influence of the public relations profession as a whole. As you can see here in the second point, even though I just told you 77% of journalists do use press releases, they are still sent so many a day that they can't possibly write that many stories. And so many news releases just go in the trash. To make yours stand out, you want to make sure that you provide information of interest and relevance to the reporter or to the media outlet. You want to ensure something that's timely and newsworthy, and then it follows the standardized format and is distributed in the proper manner. Now, in this class, you're not going to learn how to write a press release. Sometimes students say, why didn't we write a press release in this class? Well, if you want to take public relations writing, that's where you will learn how to write all these tactics. Your book does go into some detail to give you an overview, and it's really just a starting place. So if you think it's time for a press release, you would want to ask yourself the following questions. What objective is served? So am I trying to raise awareness for a new product? What is the key message? Maybe this is a new product or this is a new and improved product. Who is the primary audience? And then what does the target audience gain from this knowledge that they're going to get from this news story about your new and improved product? So the content of a news release, you want to write a headline that's 10 words max, and put your most important words toward the front of that headline. And then you'll have a lead paragraph, which would be a summary lead or a feature lead. So a summary lead is like a who, what, where, when, why type of lead. It would have a lot of that information in there. And a feature lead would be a little bit more like a story, be a little bit more, it would bury some of those facts a little deeper in the story, some of those who, what, where, when, whys. It's got to capture attention. And then what you would want to do is use inverted pyramid style, and that is where you put the most, usually, unless you're doing more of a feature story, but you want to put the most important information at the top. So the most important is at the top, and then you go down to the least important information at the bottom. It would include the 5 W's and 1 H. That's your who, what, where, when, why, and how. It should be accurate, concise, and informative. And then you can also do multimedia releases. So, when I think of a release, I often think of just something that's just text, but you could also include videos, photos, graphics, infographics. All of that could be in your release as well. So why should we use the inverted pyramid? There are 3 reasons. First, if an editor or a reporter doesn't find anything interesting in the first few lines, they're just going to throw it away. And so if you write and capture their attention and give them the heart of the story at the beginning, it's going to be more likely to capture their attention. Editors often cut stories from the bottom to make the piece shorter. And so, if they end up taking your press release and, using the information at the top and then they don't have enough room, they might cut what's at the bottom of your press release. And then readers also don't have time to read the full story. So when you send the press release to the news organization, they normally rewrite the story, but they still might put whatever you put at the top of their story, in the middle, and then, whatever's at the bottom should be the least important information, that if a reader doesn't get all the way to the bottom, that's okay. So pictured here is an example of a typical news release. And as you can see, the press release starts with some of the 5 W's. So the who, we can see, is Dr. Gerald McCarthy. The what is that he was chosen to participate in a summer institute. The when is for 2 weeks in July. And the where is at the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah. So you can also see that this press release includes quotes. It also has a headline, just like a news story. It also has contact information and the statement for immediate release, which means, we don't need to wait until next month when the new product launches, for example. I have a list here of what would be in a standard release. I added a couple things that your book didn't include. Normally you would follow sort of a template style. You'd have a template from your organization that you could use. You'd have a headline. You might have a subhead. You'd have a date line. So that's where it says Savannah, Georgia, July 11th, 2013. You would have a lead sentence, and so that's the one I just kind of broke down for you about the who, what, where, when. And then you'd have additional paragraphs, and they might have some quotes in them. You'd have the contact information, so you could see at the top that is Patricia Meager. She's the Director of Communications. You'd have the release date, so this one's okay for immediate release, which means you can put this in your paper tomorrow. And then it might have links to social media. Now that you have your press release written or your publicity photo taken, it's time to pitch the media. So how do you do that? An ineffective approach is to distribute the release to a broad list of editors and reporters and just hope that somebody picks it up. It's not the best strategy. A better strategy would be to pitch a newsworthy story about your organization directly to a specific reporter, blogger, or editor. I had a former student guest speak to my class, and she talked about a story that she had that she specifically targeted a Today Show reporter that she knew would be interested. It had something to do with science or technology that she knew would be interested in her story. She went after that reporter first. She got the reporter to do the story. So that's a better approach than sending it out to 1,000 reporters. So what is a pitch? It's a brief email or note about a story idea or a story angle that is tailored to the specific media outlet. The pitch might call attention to the news release. So you might attach the news release or send a link to the news release that's on your website. So you should, to do this, identify which media outlets are most likely to be interested in your story and the ones that have the desired audience, format, style, and influence for the story's subject matter. So like the Today Show is going to have a lot of influence because it has a lot of viewers. Media databases like Cision can help you find these reporters. So you can just, look in there and see like who's at the Today Show that has this science and technology beat, and you can find all their contact information. But it's also really helpful to read or watch or listen to the news, follow influencers and reporters on social media, and find out what they like. Also, you should be aware of current issues and what's trending on social media. So if something's in the news and it's related to your industry, that's definitely a good time you could pitch the media with a story. Maybe you or your company offers a solution to a problem that a lot of consumers are having. You can also check editorial calendars and understand submission deadlines. So what this means is that, say a magazine has an editorial calendar, they might say, our December issue is going to cover, great gifts under $50. And so if you learn that from their editorial calendar and you have a gift that's under $50, that's great. You pitch them your product and they might put that in their magazine, but also understand submission deadlines, because you don't want to pitch a magazine even in November for a December issue. Probably like you'd probably want to pitch, it depends on their calendar. It could be something like 6 months out. So for those of you who said you were interested in working in, or you're thinking about working in media relations, this is the kind of work that you would be doing. So after you've planned your pitch and thought about who you're going to target, you want to write your pitch, and then you need to follow up on your pitch. And so your pitch should have a brief, attention-grabbing lead sentence, or it should be just, very short, very brief in total, and then also have a strong subject link when you're emailing it. So it's not just something like new product announcement, it needs to be more interesting than that. Most reporters prefer email, but you can also use Twitter or make a phone call, but email is definitely the dominant way to pitch reporters. And then after 3 days, follow up. Now, what you don't want to do after 3 days is say, did you get my email about our new product? That would be very ineffective, but maybe you could add some more information or, so add some more information to that or some story angles. Then that's like a little reminder or a trigger, or maybe the second attempt gets them excited in your pitch. So in addition to news releases, there are some other things that you can send to the news media. The first one I want to talk about are media advisories or media alerts. And what these are short bulleted lists of information that alert the press to a story that they might want to cover. It's usually an invitation to an event that you might want them to cover, or as it says here, an interview opportunity. Maybe somebody's coming into town, like the CEO is going to be in town, and we would like you to interview the CEO. Or maybe there's a local person that's on a network that has made network news for some reason, and you could tell your local press about that person. So the format is generally a short headline, a lead sentence. You want to have labeled or like bulleted points of the date, time, location, also contact information. Usually have what's called a boilerplate at the end. It's also on press releases. I didn't say it back there, but a boilerplate would just be like, the University of South Florida is a preeminent institution with 40,000 plus students in the state of Florida. It's just kind of like the thing that you put at the end of all of your press releases, and you would not have any kind of visuals in this. It's basically just an invitation to something that's going on. Fact sheets, this can be used to supplement, say, a press release or a media alert. And this provides detailed background information. So it could be like an organizational profile. So here are all the facts about, say, USF. It could be an executive profile. So, our president probably has, an executive profile that's already written out that can be passed out to the news media. Company history, company culture, maybe trivia about the company, fun facts about the company, issue, something about the issue or exhibit, depending on like more context, like if it's about an issue, if it's about an art exhibit. And then it could be in the format of FAQs. So you definitely want to have like clearly labeled sections, subheadings, and bullets. Now, media kits contain an extensive amount of information and materials. And so many of the pieces that go into media kits are things that we've already discovered. Often you prepare a media kit for a major event or a grand opening, or I had one a while ago for a roller coaster at Busch Gardens. They can be multimedia, they can be print too, but nowadays most things are multimedia. So you would have everything in an online folder with photos, videos, text. You would put, as it says here, it could contain your news release, fact sheet, photos, infographics, video clips I just mentioned, the emails and phone numbers of the PR contacts, links to the website, social media. So it's all kind of in one place. So the media has really a one-stop shop for all the information they need to cover something for you. Media previews, they're sometimes called press parties, and this is where you invite journalists to see or experience something. Maybe it's before the general public. The journalists will attend if they believe there is some news value in what you're offering, or maybe they can see the event as an opportunity for them to develop contacts within your company. And so you want to make sure you have something newsworthy to talk about at the party or the preview and invite the appropriate journalists that cover that field. Generally, the party, is a social event, or the preview is a social event, and at the end you make some kind of a pitch about, what the story is. You provide the journalists with a news release, media kit, or some swag. So let's watch this video of this power press party. So with a media tour, you either go tour media outlets or you invite media outlets to your place of business. So there are three types of media tours. The first one is a tour of media outlet offices. So this is where people in PR, maybe, or company executives would meet with journalists and editors to tell their story and build those relationships, kind of like for long-term relationships, not just really for one story. A junket is where journalists are invited to tour the company headquarters or a factory, maybe. There's an example in your book where journalists were invited to take the inaugural flight for the new route for certain airlines. And so you're hosting them at your place of business. A familiarization or fam trip is where it's kind of similar to a junket, but it's more related to the travel industry, where you invite journalists who are at travel publications or freelance travel writers to come to your destination. So maybe it's come to Jamaica, or it's a certain attraction, or it's an accommodation, like maybe there's a new resort that's open, and those are fam trips. So when you organize a media tour, you as the PR professional need to take care of all the logistics. So if you have people coming to your place of business or your resort, you're in charge of their, not maybe you, but your team is in charge of their schedules and the activities and the opening night, cocktail party and the dinner and the tour and, whatever else you're doing on the trip. There must be a legitimate news angle. So your book has a lot of good examples, like reporters were invited to Iceland for, I just happen to have this drink here, Ouroboros. So we're launching our new Ouroboros, but we're just going to do it in Iceland just for the heck of it. So that would not be a reason to go to Iceland. The media should be given time to take any available tours. So just, make sure you build in, like if it's going to be a factory tour or a tour of this, that's built in. The PR professional needs to realize that there's no guarantee of a story or even a positive story. So you invite those reporters or those freelance travel writers to your new resort, and they may not like it. They write a bad story, or they decide not to write a story. They usually try to stay in the good graces of people giving them free stuff, but we can't. We have to have, the next thing is ethical considerations, and so you don't want to give, again, like a trip to Iceland to people just for the heck of it, for you're not covering anything related to Iceland, a product that's related to Iceland, and that would be an expensive gift, or even you bring them to your resort and you give them, a Louis Vuitton purse while they're there, that would be definitely frowned upon by the Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ, as well as PRSA. Let's talk about interviews and news conferences. So you're probably pretty familiar with news conferences. They are a PR tactic. It's a briefing given to reporters in a group setting. So as you can see this picture here from Apple doing a news conference for reporters who are all in the audience there. It could be for new products, a current issue that the company's facing, or even like a crisis situation that the company is having to deal with. And this is a good opportunity for the company to state, to present something, make a statement, and then the journalist can answer questions or ask questions, and then the people from the company, the executives from the company, or the PR people, whoever's on hand, can answer questions by journalists. So interviews are one-on-one situations where a journalist or a talk show host interviews an expert. So maybe your company identifies an expert on a topic that they would like to go on a show, or maybe it's an executive within the organization, or it's a celebrity spokesperson that's representing the organization. So here are more details about news conferences. They enable organizations to quickly disseminate information and opinions to a wide group of people, as you saw, a room full of reporters. They're really great for media relations, so it helps build that relationship between a company and reporters. They can be an offensive measure or a defensive device. So offensive is, when maybe you have a new product, it's positive news, or you're trying to head off a crisis that is coming, or it can be defensive. So if you were in a crisis situation, you can, explain your side of the story the best you can in a news conference. You can use it to unveil new products or address a controversy, as I've pretty much been saying. You would want to plan the news conference carefully as the PR practitioner. You'd want to select an appropriate location, make sure that the Wi-Fi was working, that you could even have satellite, because some reporters would upload stories through satellite. That there's appropriate seating for everybody. Make sure the conference runs smoothly and on time, and then ask if it truly needs to be held. So we don't want to have news conferences for piddly little news stories. They need to be big deals, because you're inviting journalists to take busy time out of their busy days to come over to your news conference. Here's some reasons to hold a news conference. Some of these I've already said a little bit already. There's an announcement affecting numerous people. There's a controversial or complex issue or situation of public concern. You may need to give many media members equal access to a key individual. So maybe you have somebody, and it's somebody a big deal, it's a CEO of an organization, and you want the media to have access to that person all at the same time. Maybe there's a public unveiling. It's a statue or something like that. That when you have a lot of requests for interviews with a visiting person of importance or a celebrity, maybe it's better just to do a news conference because that person can't go like to every news outlet and do a one-on-one interview. As the PR practitioner, what you would want to do is assist the executive in preparing statements that they're going to read at the news conference, and then also prepare talking points. You want to anticipate questions journalists might ask and then have talking points prepared for that executive. So it's, your writing skills can really come in handy here. And then also create an atmosphere of cooperation. You don't want to be like, we're not taking any questions today. That would be bad practice. Now, when we're talking about one-on-one interviews, you as the PR practitioner might need to prepare the spokesperson from your company, maybe it's the CEO or another executive from your company, for that media interview. So you would need to do media training with them. And the key thing you would work on in media training is, what is the message that we want to convey? Because we want to make sure that that message comes out through that interview. You would prepare the answers for all the possible questions. So you would think from the journalist's perspective, what questions might they ask? How are we going to answer those questions? You would want to have facts, statistics, and details ready for your spokesperson, that if they ask what percentage of people, whatever, you have that fact on hand or that statistic on hand. You would want to practice with the spokesperson to keep them on message, to know what to say and what not to say. They shouldn't lie. They should be polite. They should cooperate with the journalists. This is easy and something fun when you're doing like a fun interview, but it's a lot harder when you're, faced with a crisis situation. You're having to answer, why people died. They can call out questions that they think that are unfair, too personal, hypothetical, and so you'd want to prepare them for that possibility and have a response of what to say. They should keep a positive attitude, and then for television, remember that they should have good body language. They should also look professional too, so they should be professionally styled, and then they should learn how to talk in sound bites, because for television, we don't want people to go, if it's live or, even if it's on tape, they can't really edit out, your sentence. So try to speak as concisely as you can. You don't want to go on for, 20 minutes answering just one question. It's a little different for a newspaper or magazine because they can easily edit what you say down to something that works better in print. So let's just talk a little bit more about personal appearances or interviews on TV or radio shows. So it's important to remember that viewers can see and hear the person, and so that's why it's important for them to have a professional look for television, or at least, work on their voice for radio or television. You want to consider the possibility of booking the spokesperson. So you're going to have to pitch this person to a news organization often. And so, do you have a good person, a good story, and a good person to tell that story? So you want to think about, is it a newsworthy topic? Is this useful information that might be provided? Does this person have expertise? Do they have viewer appeal? Can this person stay on track? And can they avoid stressing the commercial angle and always just saying like, well, you can buy this go to our website and buy this product. So you as the PR person would also want to research a show's format, content, and audience base and decide whether your representative is a good match for that audience, for that show. You'd want to pitch sometimes they're called talent coordinator or talent executive, or maybe even just a producer for a news station. You'd want to pitch your spokesperson to them. Now, normally they don't say like, oh, they can come in, how about tomorrow? Unless it's like a timely or a very controversial, timely topic. And so, you want to schedule these people out. They'd probably be scheduled out a few weeks or months. Then you would want to not only prepare your representative, but also the talk show staff and the host, like give them fact sheets and other information that they can work from to write up their questions. And then the spokesperson, when you get them on air, they should be passionate about the subject. They should be comfortable on screen. They should dress appropriately. And that's why media training is so important. Now, one thing you can't do is after the story has been written or that's been taped, you can't say, we would like final approval of that story before it goes on air. You're really just turning yourself over to the journalist. And, you're this is why it's uncontrolled media. They can do with it what they want. So when your representative is making a personal appearance on a radio or television show, we can do this a couple of ways. We can do something that's called a promotional tour, and this is where the person is they're not just doing like a one-off interview, but they're actually going on tour to talk on a lot of different TV and radio stations. And they would stay in a central location, and then the news station would just like tap in. And so it could be a radio media tour, or for television, it's called often called a satellite media tour. Now, today, we don't always, we have other technology to use in addition to satellite. So, before we used to like beam the person up from a location, like maybe they would go to their local TV station and then beamed up to NBC News. But now, of course, as you know, we have Zoom and lots of other technologies that we can use. But here's, an example. We know what this looks like today. So, that person, that Youth of the Year person, Boys and Girls Club Youth of the Year, that person from Boys and Girls Club can just stay in their location, and then lots of news stations can talk to that person. And they can be on location, and what I mean by that is like they don't have to be in an office or the Boys and Girls Club headquarters. They could be out in the field doing something cool. In addition to radio interviews, there are other ways to reach radio audiences, and the first one is to send a radio news release to a radio station. This could be in one of three formats. The first one is a script for them to read on the air. And then, so the host would read it. The second one is an audio news release where it's already produced. All the audio is already produced, and they can just pop that into their newscast. And the third type is an audio news release with actualities. And actualities are sound bites. And so where an audio news release could just be, one person reading it through, the one with actualities can involve more interviews in it. So you hear multiple people in it. It makes it a little bit more interesting. You also have radio public service announcements, and this would be an unpaid announcement that promotes the programs of government or charitable or civic agencies, or that somehow serves the public interest. And they are produced and distributed just like A&Rs. They could be, they could have actualities in them as well. And generally you send various lengths. So you might have a 15-second, 30-second, 60-second. And if it's appropriate to have, different languages. So you might have an English language version or a Spanish language version. The Ad Council is where you can find lots of examples of public service announcements, both for radio and television. So let's talk about other ways to reach television audiences. So one example, just like with radio, where you have an audio news release, you can have a video news release for television. They're called VNRs. They're more than just a single news story is usually what they send over. It's more like a package of video content. And so normally you'd have what's called A-roll and B-rolls. So A-roll is like the story already produced. It can run on air, no problem. B-rolls are like background information and they're not usually voiced over. It's just like if you want to pan something, like show the scenery, show the product, show the facility or something like that. You might send B-roll so that if the news station wants to put the story together themselves, they have all that B-roll and they will voice over it themselves. And so when you do have a VNR, the source should be clearly identified. And a lot of times when you're watching the news, you will see these VNRs and you'll just think, oh, that's just a news story. And I'll show you one here in a minute. And then you should also clearly label the source of any VNR, like I just said, or any B-roll, because maybe the B-roll is something you acquired from somebody else. So just make sure to label that too. So let me show you this clip of Walmart. So the second other way on here to reach television audiences is through a video public service announcement. So just like radio public service announcements, we have television public service announcements. And so many of the same guidelines for radio apply to television. And when you have actualities in your public service announcement, like so you have a soundbite from somebody, you should have somebody with a good voice, attractive appearance, maybe even a celebrity. We will wrap up by talking about product placements, which I'm sure you're quite familiar with if you watch television or movies. Your book does a good job of talking about product placements over time. They are sometimes referred to as plugs. Now, the deals are made between the brand and the producers, and often there's a middleman. There's a product placement company that's looking to match brands with television shows or movies. And the payment method can involve one of several business models or models here. The first one's a cash fee. So I pay you $1 million for you to feature my brand on your show. It could be a loan where maybe I loan you a car or an airplane or a fancy watch, and then you're supposed to give it back to me when the show is over, when the filming is over. It could be a trade out. So I just give you the product instead of loaning it to you. I give it to you. So I give you free products and then you give me the free publicity. I don't have to pay for it. And then finally, you could give somebody a location. So maybe you let them film at your resort or your home or whatever. It wouldn't be your home. It would be like a resort because it would be a business. And so this is a win-win, both for the brands and then also for the show and the film, because they get money from the brands or they get free products from the brands. And so just a few examples here from history: Breaking Bad, and then Sex and the City, lots of products always mentioned on that show. And then if you've seen the movie Castaway from a very long time ago, FedEx was featured prominently. And I actually saw a recent story about FedEx that talked very specifically about the deal that they had with Castaway, which was interesting. If you've ever seen this very old Tom Hanks movie, is that he is a FedEx pilot and his plane crashes. So that doesn't sound like great PR for FedEx that his plane crashed, but they decided it was worth it in the end for their brand to be all over the place. And he was a great guy, and FedEx, maybe came off as a great company and all of that. So even though their plane crashed. So as a PR professional, you have the following mass media tactics available to you to gain publicity for your clients. When you work in public relations, you should know when it is appropriate to use these tactics and how to use them. You should also develop good relationships with journalists who will be covering your stories.